when he approved the abatement now in Journal Square that's rising up. We see the first building open, Journal Square. He had promised in 2013 to allocate abatement funding to the school system, and with that was the first sign that he wasn't going to follow through on that promise. And what I asked at the time was, why are you not doing that? And the answer I got from someone on his, in City Hall was, well, if we take this abatement funding and allocate it to the school system, we will get less state aid. So there is, and I'm not a state aid expert, but that was what explained to me, was that there was an inverse relationship between the degree to which we can fund ourselves locally and the degree to which we receive state aid. Now, my takeaway, and I hadn't even started my blog yet, I didn't really understand any of this really. My takeaway was, well, from a common sense perspective, don't you want to basically try and fund your school system if isn't that the most important thing to take care of? Because if the state does take away funding, you're left exposed. I mean, it's a very common sense dynamic to me, in the sense that aid is aid, meaning someone else is giving it to you. Locally funded, whether it's tax-based dollars or abatement dollars, that's the council and the mayor have control over that pie. So my answer, the way I would respond to that, just as a taxpayer and as someone who's researched this is a long-term problem that has grown over decades. There's no quick fix. Spending should be controlled on a municipal level. We need to prioritize, what do we care about as a community? Do we care about our public schools, or do we care about bike lanes and murals and getting more high-rise luxury towers downtown? And I think that there are legitimate reasons to support all of that. People do want bike lanes. People do want a good arts program. People do want good schools. People do want really nice buildings to live in. They want new restaurants. This is a very complicated discussion. My priority is a healthy school system, because I think that feeds into everything else that we have as a community. So what I would like to see is, speaking as a taxpayer and just as a parent, I want to see us weaning off of pilots, which will necessarily force the city to control its spending. And I want to see a serious commitment to the school system, because this exposure tells me that the city doesn't care about our school system. That's what it tells me. I mean, you follow the money, you can see where the priorities are. They are using these pilots to fund city growth to the expense of the school system, and I personally have a problem with that. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
So I can add a little bit. Part of that is kind of like twofold. There is a point where a district can get reevaluated, and they will say, okay, you are no longer a low wealth district because you have all of this wealth, and then they will increase the amount of money that they're supposed to put in. However, over the last 9 years, there hasn't been a reevaluation, and so really that money could have been going in. You guys still have been getting all of that state aid, and it would have been kind of like a little pocket of money for the district to have. So really, it's kind of been a disservice in a lot of ways. But the other point is that there's wiggle room in there. So there are lots of districts that actually raise locally well over what they say is their local contribution, and are still getting and still get their full state aid, and it hasn't changed in terms of what the state is supposed to give them. So it's kind of a two-prong answer, which I know isn't the best, but yeah.
Because the formula is separate from how the city raises its revenue to pay for its school.
Right. So there is a point in which if Jersey City got so much money that the state would have to go back and say, okay, now this is excessive. You guys need to put in more money. But there are plenty of districts that, again, are raising locally millions of dollars more and putting them well over. And then there's also districts who are raising more money than they're supposed to locally and are getting nothing in state aid. It's really divorced at this point. And so, we almost kind of lost out on a lot of money because if that makes any sense.
I think too that just from a in New Jersey, property taxes fund the school system, right? That's sort of the way it works, right? And then state aid and Abbott Now, I'm not an Abbott expert, but my understanding of Abbott is meant to be a remedy, right? Where because Jersey City's tax base was gutted effectively decades ago, state aid was meant to be a remedy for that. We've seen an influx of billions of dollars of evaded wealth. Why should they not pay school tax? Why should someone, it's not about who lives in the abated buildings, it's just about what do we value as a community? You know, and why should a third of the people living in the city not be subject to school tax? It's sort of a values question, I think, partially.
But I think the state aid is dependent on the need of the child. I mean, the demographics, whatever, that are exhibited within a particular district.
Right. So it's partially the demographics, and then also partially what the state thinks that the district can handle. And so I think that's the piece that I guess they were trying to kind of hint at, is that if we have all of these new buildings popping up, they're going to say, oh, the state's going to come back and say that we can contribute more, which is debatable. You know, you kind of have to look more deeply into the formula and look at all of the different things that go into it, because there is a piece in there that's going to say, well, you still have this large low-income community that has to put into factor. So it's not just, oh, there's a lot of buildings and stuff. It does have to do with the community at large.
Now a big dynamic of that can change this whole conversation is the children who are living downtown and the incomes that their parents are making, changing the demographics, whatever, the socioeconomic status, whatever, of families in Jersey City can radically change the funding formula, right?
Can I? Because it's okay. In 2009, when the state did this formula, right? That got rid of Abbott. Before that, it was basically the 31 poorest districts were being funded at the level of the highest wealth districts in the state. Right? And assumed level of poverty in those communities based on the demographics then. With this new funding formula, that changed, right? The money's following the child, wherever the poor child is or wherever English language learner is, the money is following that child. It costs more to educate that child. I think that this discussion about Jersey City and about school funding and how much aid Jersey City gets, it became acute and became something that is really at the forefront of this school funding debate because the current governor hasn't run or funded the formula, right? As you saw from the charts before, Jersey City is getting more aid than it should under SFRA, but they're not getting a ton of aid more than they should, right? Jersey City is getting $1 million or $2 million more than it should. Right? Now, that on a $600 million budget is not a lot. That on $400 and something million in state aid is not a lot. The issue is really that the formula isn't being run and it's not being funded. And while Jersey City is getting all of the aid that it should, and other communities, you have a lot of communities in the state that are getting nowhere near the full amount of aid that they should, right? And doing that over 7 years causes significant problems. It's not just you're $1 billion short for 1 year in the entire system and everybody needs to make adjustments. This has been going on for 7 years while enrollments are increasing, your costs are increasing, and keep in mind also that it's while the formula didn't assume a 2% property tax cap. The formula didn't assume a 2% cap on your budget, on your school budget. And what does that mean? It means that before that cap was in place, a school district, there was a 4% cap, but they had many exemptions. Like, for example, if you didn't get sufficient state aid, you could raise your property taxes to cover it. the new cap that came into place in 2011, right? Eliminated all of that. It's a hard cap. It's 2%. If you're not getting money, if you're not getting state aid, sufficient state aid to educate your kids, you have to deal with it. You have to go to the voters to say, hey, I want to raise the levy above 2%, and considering what the governor did as soon as he came into office, telling people not to vote their budgets down, basically. That's increasingly difficult. It's increasingly difficult to do that in this environment. And we were talking about a reval in Jersey City. Now the question is, if school aid decreases for Jersey City, and if school aid decreases because pilots aren't happening anymore, and our piloted property is now on the tax rolls as regular taxes, that has to be made up somewhere, right? Say for example, it's $100 million in abated revenue each year, in pilot revenue each year, and you're not giving any of that to the schools. If all of a sudden you have to give 25% of it to the schools, that 25% that's being used to fund municipal services has to be made up. And it has to be made up by the taxpayers in Jersey City, right? So there are a lot of different moving parts to the issue. Jersey City is not typical. Jersey City has a lot of abated properties. It is something that we have an issue with as the NJEA. We believe that revenue should be shared with the schools. At the end of the day, though, our concern is on the spending side. Our concern is that the schools have the revenues that they need to educate the kids that are in the schools. Whether it comes from property taxes or state aid is less important. We want to make sure that the schools can educate their kids. The formula and the adequacy budget that we talked about earlier is just a measure of whether you're doing that or not. And we know right now that Jersey City isn't, right? Even with all that state aid, $418 million, right? And with pilot revenue that they're not providing to the district. And with property tax revenue, Jersey City is still spending, 90-something million dollars less than it should to educate all its kids? Like, how is that sustainable? And if as abatements come, because they don't last forever, they started in the 80s, right? It's 2017 now, so they're starting to come, some of them are starting to come offline. Some of them have already, more will start coming offline. Abatements didn't happen in like a gradual growth. They're in big chunks, right? When those come offline, and the formula at that time can see the wealth, can see the property wealth, because that's what it basically is. If a property is abatement, the formula in calculating what your district's wealth is and what your district's ability to pay is, it doesn't see the abated properties, right? It doesn't see it at all. So when those start coming off or start coming online as regular property taxes, that is going to be a major problem in this city, major problem. And I don't think that my concern is that while that is happening, right, school aid will decrease as a result because Jersey City has so much abated property relative to other communities, right? We're going to see a decrease in school aid, and the city is already not spending what it should. So how are we going to deal with that? How are property taxpayers in Jersey City going to deal with it? How is any mayor that's sitting in that office at that time going to deal? I don't think it's going to be something that I mean, I think it's going to be catastrophic, frankly. It's underfunded by $1 billion a year. It's been underfunded for the past 7 years under this governor. And we don't believe that you should be taking school aid away from kids in other communities or kids in certain communities to give to other communities. Especially because one of the reasons for that is that, as I talked about before, about the 2% cap on how much your budget can increase, right? So if you're a community that is slated for this influx of aid increase that's coming from another community that has been using it for their schools, and you're slated for this influx, and that influx is over 2% of your budget, then that's going to be used to reduce property taxes in the community, right? It's property tax relief. It's going to be used to reduce people's property tax bill. Now, for the community that's receiving the aid, that might be great year one, right? You reduce people's property taxes, all good. The next year, what would happen is that 2% cap would come back to bite you, and it would come back to bite you because then the 2% increase would be on a smaller base, right? Would be on a smaller school budget, basically, right? So that is not something that is healthy in our opinion, and for us, as I said before, it's all about whether schools in all communities have the resources that they need to educate the kids that they serve. And we are strong advocates for holding the governor accountable and the legislature accountable for providing all the school aid that they should each year.
Nothing, because one of the reasons they want the tax abatement is because they want it artificially low for 20 and 30 years, and it is artificially low. So it's really the amount to be raised by taxation can't go up by more than 2%. Okay, because from my perspective, listening to all this, it was very confusing. So if there was an influx of cash and the budget went up, it's okay. It's fine, just so you don't raise people's taxes by more than 2%.
Right, it's the revenue that you can raise to support the schools, right?
Right, the taxation. Right, so if a bunch of properties come off of abatements, and a good portion, whatever, like right now we pay about we pay more to the county than the schools right now, goes to the schools, and that chunk goes to the schools, and you have, you need to hire more teachers because you have this, and this, or you have to put some money into your capital budget, or what do you got to do? As long as you don't raise that tax amount by more than 2%, that's fine.
Right, but
So let them all come on. But what you're saying, that impacts your state aid, because then they use the assessed valuation on calculating what the city is worth.
Right.
But it's not dollar for dollar, though.
No, it might not be. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be like a small percentage. It could put you in a...
Well, it could be, I think it could be a small percent in other communities. I don't think that it would be a small percent in Jersey City because...
But it won't be dollar for dollar.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think it will be dollar for dollar.
But because of how much piloted property is in Jersey City,
Right.
when those, and they're not coming off, like a little bit of each year, there's going to be a time period over a couple of years where there is going to be a large number of properties that are coming back on the tax roll, or that are coming on the tax rolls.
There
right?
already have been.
And well, yes, but these started in 1980. The city has been giving a lot of abatements. I mean, in the 90s, right?
Oh yeah, in the
going to
future,
have-
absolutely.
Right, you're going to have a lot coming off at the same time, and it's not just the number that's coming off. It's that the properties that are going to come off are properties that are worth more typically than other properties in other parts of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to have a significant impact. I don't think that the impact is going to be small and negligible. I think there's going to be a number of years, I say within like a 4 or 5 year period, where that is just going to it's going to have a significant impact on the
But the school aid is coming down anyway.
Well, no.
Right? Or
we
even
don't
if it's
accept
flat,
that.
it's flat.
We don't accept that.
Flat is going down when you have an inflationary
Well,
period.
We don't accept that. The school aid is flat right now because of Governor Christie. That's it, right? That's why the school aid is flat. And I think that I
And
think
also the
that,
fact that they're number 50 in the country in terms of the funding of their pensions.
that who's number 50 in the country.
The state of New Jersey is number 50 in the amount of pensions that are funded. That's how bad the funding is.
What does that have to do with school aid?
Oh, well, it has to do with the state budget. If you've got like $5 and all of a sudden you have to pay debt service or whatever, you're not going to increase your school
If we're going to have a discussion
aid.
about the budget in general, then you have to talk about corporate welfare. You have to talk about many other things,
Oh, yeah.
right? It's $35 billion, and in our view, schools are a healthy part of that, and in our view, that should be a number one priority. And we challenge the current governor and and ensure that we are in discussions with who we believe is going to be the next governor to make sure that schools are a priority. I mean, schools have not been a priority for this governor. I don't think that there's anyone who would disagree with that. This governor doesn't care about public schools at all, and he's made no bones about that. And I think that, and we believe that this school funding issue isn't because there isn't enough revenue in the state.
Whether or not we think the pie is going to grow or shrink in the future, I'm going to talk about how we divided up the pie, right? Or how the pie has been divided over over the last little while. We looked at the last 6 years of budgets and to see how the pie was divided up. How was the budget of the schools divided, whether it came from local or state sources or what have you. You know, when all of that was put together, what were the priorities of Jersey City schools? And the main story is there was less money for maintenance, social services, classroom instruction, teacher salaries. Those slices of pie shrunk, right? Even if they grew in an absolute number, their share of the pie shrunk. There was more money for charter schools, for security, for transportation, right? This probably doesn't surprise any of the people in this room, right? This is consistent with some of the things that we're seeing nationally. Okay, so in between 2010 and 2016, right, the number of students grew by about 1,700. There's almost 15,000 new people in Jersey City, right? So the city is growing, the school district is growing, right? Expenditures. You know, the amount that was spent on the school, the total budget from the school from all of the sources we're talking about has grown by about 11%. The number of students, you know, by contrast, is about half of that, right? The number of students is up about 5.5%. So when you look at when you compare that with teacher salaries, right? Teacher salaries, the share of that's teacher salaries has basically grown a little more than 2%, even while total instruction has gone down. Spending on instruction has gone down, and total expenditures has gone up by about 11%. Right.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
So here's a better way to present it, right? So on a per pupil basis, right? The budget has gotten bigger, right? But the amount that's gone for instruction, the amount that goes to teachers, resources in the classroom, etc., has gone down over the last 6 years.
That, okay. I got that.
Excuse me? So when you say amount for teachers, that
So salaries of principals and assistant principals has gone up. The amount that's spent on on administrative compensation has gone down, but that actually belies something, because they've laid off a lot of administrators, but the ones who have stayed have gotten very big raises, right? So that, that it's a logic that comes from corporate America in some ways, which is, in the airline industry, you always hear about airlines going into bankruptcy and the CEOs getting big bonuses and big salaries, and the justification is, well, we need to keep the CEO on because it's a troubled company and we don't want them to leave, etc. That's the kind of logic that's been imported into education, where you can see, right, that the average they've cut the number of administrators, they've cut many costs, but the amount that administrators are getting is now substantially higher, right? So the average administrative compensation is now $20,000 higher. And you were saying, Kevin, right, that it's a lot of new people who have come in to the city who can negotiate outside of the parameters of whatever agreements they have with the principals, assistant principals, and so on. Is that right? Right, that they're
Yeah, we've had a lot of administrators come in.